Well, aloha and welcome to Flow of Control 2. We're going to talk about loops. I'm going to try to make this a little quicker because you guys are getting a little more experienced and you don't need so much explanation. So let's get right into it. So today we're going to talk about how to perform repetition of statements using the while, do, for, and the do while loop, and we'll give a bunch of examples, and we'll talk about sort of a modification of this called the for loop and when you'd want to use that over the others. Iteration is the way that you repeat a statement multiple times, and the way it tends to work is you have a loop control, which is going to be a conditional expression, and anything within this block is going to be repeated until the loop control goes false. There are three different forms of iteration that are pretty common: the while, the for, and the do while. They basically are all variations of the same thing. So anything you can do with a while you can do with a for, and anything you do with a for you can do with a while. You can always convert one to the other. It's just which is more convenient for what you're doing. So a while loop basically says that it's a conditional statement. That means that, again, like an if statement, you have this thing, it's not a function, but the keyword while, and you have to have the parentheses, and in there is a condition, and as long as that condition is true, the statement is going to be executed. When it's false, the statement does not get executed and it goes on to the next statement. For loops are a variation of that. For loop is where you start at a particular place and have a condition for where you end and describe how that is incremented. And what happens is these three things work together to say repeat starting here while this is true until and change it according to this. In the while loop, you're responsible for changing the increment, but in a for loop, it does increments for you. So in terms of a while loop, you could write a for loop as the same thing. You start out the condition while this condition is true, you do your statement, and then you do your increment, and then it just keeps repeating this until this condition is false. Do loop is the same thing, except for that instead of checking the condition first, it actually does the statement, executes the statement first, then checks the condition. So a while loop checks the condition and only repeats it while this is true. This one does the statement first, then does it while the condition is true. So this ensures that the statement is executed at least once. And so the way to do that, the equivalent form is by just doing the statement first and then doing a while loop. So let's look at the basic while loop. That's a certain basic thing. It just says that, again, while this condition is true, execute this statement. And what happens is you keep executing it until it's no longer true. Or a break is executed. So break is another keyword that will, regardless of whether the condition is true or false, it will stop repeating it if it gets a break command. So here's an example. It says x, you set some values and we do a while $x is greater than 0, and in here we're just going to add x to a running sum. So s starts from 0 and we're just going to add x to it, which starts out at 5, and then here's our incrementer. It actually is going down, so x starts out at 5, now it goes to 4, and then it goes 3, 2, 1. And then what happens is when x is no longer greater than 0, so that when x equals 0, this condition is false, and this block does not get executed anymore. What happens is that x starts out at 5, and s is at 0, so s now becomes 5 at the first execution of this. Notice that when x is equal to 5, 5 is greater than 0. That's true, so that gets executed and that gets executed. Now, this is x minus 1, so x was 5. Now, after I reassign it, x is 4. And I go up here, 4 is greater than 0. That's true, so this gets executed and that's executed. Now, x is 3, 2, 1, 0. 0 is not greater than 0, it's equal to 0, so this would be false, so these no longer execute. The upshot of all this is that s becomes the sum of the numbers 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1. Let's try that out. doing a reformat just to make it look nice. Again, like with the if statements, when you're under the control of a while condition, you traditionally indent things over to the right to show that these two statements are under the control of that while. Notice that because they're in the parentheses here, or the curly braces, that both of these are things under the control. If I had put the parentheses here, or I didn't put the parentheses, let's just take the parentheses out, and I reformat, you'll see that now this is no longer indented because it's not under the control of the while anymore. So be careful about where you put your curly braces. It's always a good idea that even if you only have one statement, just to put the curly braces in there just to make it clear. And more often than not, if you have to modify your code, you may end up adding an extra line. So what we'll end up here saying is we'll print $s. We'll say here x is $x and s is $s. So if I run this, you see x is 0, s is 15. X started out at 5 and it went to 0, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and s is 15. It was 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1, which you can convince yourself is 15. We went down with x, but there's nothing stopping us from going up with x as our incrementer, and you can also change the condition so that it stops when it is greater than a certain value. So that's sort of counting down. Now we can count up. So here we start with x equals 1 and s equals 0. Okay, x is equal to 1, 1 is less than or equal to 10. That's true. This is true. Therefore, this gets executed and this gets executed. S is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1, so 1 gets assigned to s. S is now 1. X is 1. X plus 1 would be 2. Assign that back to x. Now x is 2. Go back up to the top here. 2 is less than or equal to 10. That's true. And now we do it again. Now we have 1 plus 2. So now 1 plus 2 is going to be 3, right? And now x is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. Assign that to x. X is now equal to 3. Come back up to here, because we're at the end. 3 is less than or equal to 10. That's true. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now when we get to 10, x equals 10. 10 is less than or equal to 10. That's true. So this gets executed again. Now x is 11. X comes back up to here. 11 less than or equal to 10 is false, and we stop executing. So you can try this code if you want. And I just do a reformat here. And I run that. And you see x equals 11, s equals 55. It's important to realize that at the end of this loop, I'm not at 10. X is going to be 11 because I have the equal sign there, right? So x actually is 11. It's one more than where I end at. It's very common to make a mistake on where you end the loop. If I make that less than and I run it, you notice that no, I've got to take that out. Notice that it says that x equals 10 and s equals 45. Make that a little bigger so you can see it. Now, notice if I put that x is greater than or equal to 10, what's going to happen is I'm going to get an infinite loop, because what happens is that x starts out with, it was not going to get an infinite loop, it's going to get an empty loop, because x equals 1 here, 1 is greater than or equal to 10 is false, so this stops executing, and x never gets incremented, so this ends up going nowhere. It's called an empty loop. So if I run that there, you see x equals 1, s equals 0. Not what I wanted. The condition is I want things to be true until I want it to stop being true. And in this case, I want it to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I want it to stop after it's not 10 anymore. So you got to remember the condition here is that this has to be true for things to continue. Moving along here, so That was an example of an empty loop. You could also do an infinite loop. So if it turns out that, let's just say, what would always be true? Well, if I had something like here, x is greater than 0, well, 1 is greater than 0. That's true. So this executes, yes? And now x is 2, goes back up through 2 is greater than 0. 3, 4, 5, 6. It's always going to be greater than 0. So this will just run forever. Now, PHP actually has a provision for this. If you try actually running this, it'll run for quite a while. See, it says waiting for localhost. And it's just going to spin. See how it's spinning here? So we're in an infinite loop. But after a little while, it'll time out. And it'll say, I've exceeded the maximum amount of execution time. It's a little bit of a protection. I hope that that's actually what's set. It might not actually be set to do that. Looks like so. If you find yourself in an infinite loop, rather than waiting, see it now, it finally timed out. You didn't see it, but there's an output here that just said that it was a maximum execution time. But you see it stopped spinning, but there was no output. If you find yourself in an infinite loop, let's just try that again. So you run that again. You can just hit the stop here. See how the X, if you just stop that there. That's one way of doing it. Of course, a simple way of getting an infinite loop is you could just say something like while true. If you say while true, it's just going to just go on forever because true is always true. While false, of course, never runs anything. It just goes right to the next executable statement. Be careful, like with the if statement, never to put a semicolon at the end of the conditional. That's really nothing because this is just going to be an empty loop. There's nothing to execute. It doesn't matter whether it's true or false. It's still going to be empty. So be careful about that.